Well, hey everybody, welcome back to class. This is Module 3, Existential Theories, Core Concepts. We are shifting gears as we will do every couple of weeks in this Counseling Theories class, where we talk about one theory for a couple of weeks like we did in Module 1 and 2 with Freud's psychoanalytic theory, and then we kind of move off of that onto something different because we have all these different theories that we want to cover in our class. And so I don't want you to forget what we talked about the last 2 weeks with Freud. I want you to put it to the side, if you will. We're going to hang on to those core ideas from Freud all the way through the semester. And we're just going to keep building stuff on top of it, so to speak, right? So that's what we're doing this week. For the next 2 weeks, we're going to be talking about Viktor Frankl's existential theory. My hunch is you probably have heard the term existentialism. Existentialism is a philosophical concept that you might study in your general philosophy class that is very, very interesting. And in a way, Viktor Frankl sort of took some key ideas from existentialism many, many years ago, and he created a counseling approach, a helping approach, because he was a psychologist and psychiatrist. And it is an idea that sort of like Freud's psychoanalytic theory, the core ideas of existential theory we still see today all throughout the helping profession. So existential theory can be a little tricky. Whenever I teach this theory in the live classroom, I always tell people up front, okay, hang on a second. This is going to feel a little bit like a philosophy class for a couple of weeks, okay? Because existential theory is more a philosophical approach as opposed to like a hands-on counseling approach. It's more of a philosophy of living and more of a philosophy of looking at people and their problems. So it's got a little bit of philosophical kind of approach to it. Let me give you an example of that with this opening question. If I were to ask you this existential question today, how would you answer it? What is your purpose in life? What is your purpose in life? Now, you may say, I don't know. Okay. Well, my challenge would be, well, think about it. Some might even be tempted to say, well, I don't have a purpose. This theory would say that's actually false. Every single one of us is doing something in this world. And the problem is not that we don't have a purpose, it's that we've not found it. And this theory is built upon that idea, this idea that as people, you and I are here for a reason. We are on this planet for a reason. And that one of the main things that will make us feel successful, happy, and fulfilled and healthy in our lives, according to this theory, is if we have found in our lives healthy purpose and direction. And that oftentimes part of why we struggle in our lives is we have lost our way. We have lost our sight of what am I really about? What am I here for? What am I doing in my life, right? Existential theory is a very, what we call an introspective theory. It promotes this idea, which we'll talk about here in a second, of you and I always looking inward at ourselves. Now, that's tricky if you stay with Freud, because again, Freud said that most of our brain and our mind is unconscious. Well, Viktor Frankl came along, like other theorists came along, and he said, well, I'm not saying that I don't agree with that, but you know what? Even though we may have unconscious unawareness and unconscious, part of our brain, we have blind spots. Guess what? All of us have the ability to look inside ourselves, and we're going to talk about that here in just a second. I give you some information in the lecture notes as well about Viktor Frankl, a very interesting historical figure. Frankl was a concentration camp survivor, an Austrian Jew who survived the concentration camps during World War II. And as a result of that, wrote a very famous book called Man's Search for Meaning. And the book Man's Search for Meaning was kind of one of the very first self-help books published way back in the day. And in that book, Frankl talked about his experience of surviving in the concentration camp. And he makes several observations of what he learned by being in that horrible, life-threatening situation. One of the key things that he found was that when people gave up, they died. When people gave up and had no hope, they died emotionally, spiritually, and then physically. And the people who thrived, I'm not sure how you thrive in a concentration camp, the people who survived, it was not by fate or luck or chance. Almost always, it was because those people wanted to live. They found meaning. They had hope. They never gave up and lost hope. And because they never lost hope, they stayed alive emotionally, spiritually, and oftentimes physically. And so a very interesting book. And Frankl is credited. There are many men and women who are kind of credited with being the fathers and mothers of existential theory. But in a lot of ways, Viktor Frankl is kind of the father of existential theory in many ways. And I want to highlight for you just really 2 or 3 or 4 key ideas out of our lecture notes. Watch this video, look at your lecture notes, go into the textbook and read the chapter textbook that Corey provides for us on existential theory. It's very good. Do your discussion question, do your homework. Here are some key ideas. Number 1, this theory promotes something really simple, but it's also very profound. The first thing this theory is built on is the idea that even though the bulk of our mind might be unconscious, we have the capacity for self-awareness or insight. That even though we may have unconscious dark spots or blind spots, every single person has the capacity, the powerful capacity, Frankl would say, to look inside ourselves, insight or self-awareness. We have the capacity to understand ourselves, to think about our lives, to think about how we feel, to think about what we're doing, to make plans. We have the capacity to look inside ourselves. Some of you are going to take your basic counseling skills class. And one of the things we sometimes teach, we kind of laugh about in the basic counseling skills class, is as helpers, and especially as counselors, we oftentimes ask clients, how do you feel about that? Or how does that make you feel? Or what do you think about that? Now, those questions are we sometimes kind of poke fun at those questions. They're kind of canned, basic kind of helping skills kinds of questions. Those questions are powerful. We ask those kinds of questions for all kinds of reasons. Here's the bottom line, though. Those kinds of questions, how does that make you feel? It implies something. It implies that you and I have the capacity to understand our emotions. You and I would never ask someone, how does that make you feel? If we believe that there's no way we can understand how we feel. But we do believe that. We do believe that you and I have the capacity to look inside ourselves and say, well, how do I feel? What am I feeling? Why am I feeling this way? What do I want to do? What can I do different? What am I thinking right now? This idea of looking inside ourselves, this theory is built on that idea. It's a little bit of a departure away from Freud, where Freud said, yeah, the bulk of our mind is dark and the dark corners of our mind, who knows why we do what we do? Frankl and the existentialists came along and said, well, we can understand why we do what we do. It may take time. It may take effort. We may not always know why we feel what we feel, but we can think about it. We can figure it out, I bet. So it promotes the capacity for self-awareness. Number 2, controversial in some ways, Frankl was a believer that every single one of us is free and responsible. Now, what does that mean? Free and responsible means this: no one makes us do anything. Maybe you've heard that phrase before. If you're a parent, have you ever told your son or daughter, no one made you do that, you chose to do that? Or maybe you've said to your son or daughter, or someone maybe said to you when you were a kid, hey, if someone told you to jump off a bridge, would you jump off too? Kind of promoting. My parents used to say that to me. I was the youngest in my family. I had older brothers. They were always trying to get me to do stuff, and then I would blame them. They would get me to do something. I knew it was wrong. I would do it, and then I would blame them because they made me do it. My parents had nothing to do with that, right? Just like you wouldn't as a parent either, and I wouldn't either as a parent. When I would try to blame somebody else for my choices, my parents were quick to say, no one makes you do anything. If you cut out from school early, that's on you. Hey, the fact that a friend asked you to do it, or a friend asked you to do X, Y, or Z, don't blame them. That's on you. That's kind of what Frankl sort of teaches of the existential theory, is that all of us are free. We can basically choose. We have choices to make, and the choices we make are our choices. So therefore, we are responsible for them. So therefore, we are responsible, and we can try to blame other people, which we do, but as long as we're blaming other people for our behavior and choices, we're just going to stay right where we are or go backwards in our lives. If we want to go forward in our lives and have fulfilling and stable and successful and healthy lives, we ought to take responsibilities for ourselves, because we are responsible for ourselves and we are free. Now, does freedom mean that we can do whatever we want to do? Well, we have to live with the consequences of that, but technically we really can. We have much freedom today. But we're not free from the consequences of our choices, but we are free to make choices. And existential theory highlights that idea, which we draw from all the time in counseling. You'll be counseling with someone, and someone will start blaming somebody else for their problem, and oftentimes we confront that. And part of why we confront it is because we know that, hey, we're all responsible for ourselves, right? People, somebody, maybe you're counseling somebody and they say, well, I don't know, I can't do anything. Well, all of us know that's not true. I don't know, I have no options. I've had clients before say, I don't know, Glenn, I have no options. I know that's not true, right? And sometimes I'll say, well, hang on a second, we always have options, don't we? You can do so. What's something different you can, there's nothing different I can do. Okay. You don't have any, think about what you've got, don't you have options, don't you, right? And so that's kind of what this existential idea of freedom and responsibility is all about. It promotes the importance of self-aware, the capacity for self-awareness. Number two, that all of us are free and responsible. Number three, this is kind of the first of many theories that stresses the importance of relationships and that we need one another, that we were built for connection with other people, and that healthy people have healthy relationships, and healthy people have connections with other people. Unhealthy people disconnect and isolate. And when you and I disconnect and isolate, it's usually not good for us emotionally, spiritually, psychologically, mentally, physically. We all need one another, and we have a need for relationships. And so kind of an idea of that. Frankl, this theory is a believer that, people who have unhappy relationships are unhappy people. Show me someone who's unhappy. Frankl would say, show me someone who's really unhappy in life, and I'll show you someone who has unhappy, unfulfilling relationships. Because we need connection with one another. We naturally need that connection to receive and to give. So it's not just one way. It's not selfishness. It's not just all about me getting love from other people. This theory promotes the idea, like many theories do, that we were born also to give affection, to receive affection, to give connection, to receive connection, and that we all need one another. We need connection in relationships. And so this theory was sort of the first of one of many to kind of promote that importance of relationships. Last couple of ideas. Here's this fourth, I guess is the fourth idea. This theory promotes the idea that all of us are looking not just for relationships, but for something else. This theory promotes the idea that all of us naturally look for purpose, meaning, and direction in life. That's why I asked you the question earlier, what is your purpose in life? That question was kind of connected to this core idea. This theory promotes the idea that all of us naturally are looking for purpose. We want our lives to mean something. We want our lives to have direction. Maybe you've been there in life where maybe you felt like your life had no purpose. My hunch was that was not a very pleasant experience, right? Most of the time when people have no purpose, it feels bad. There's a reason why it feels bad. This theory says because naturally we all want to feel like our lives have meaning and purpose and have direction. And there are two key questions that I give you in the lecture notes I'm going to review with you real quickly right here that are sort of central to that idea of searching for purpose and meaning. There are what we call two existential questions. Here they are. Number one, who am I? Number two, why am I here? And this theory teaches that every person, all of us, must ask and answer for ourselves those two questions. Who am I? What defines me? What am I about? What do I believe? What do I stand for? What are my values? Who am I as a person? I know my name is Glenn. I would say my name is Glenn, but I'm more than a name. Who am I? And that this theory promotes the idea that many of us have never really fully thought about who we are. Maybe what we've done is we've allowed society or other people to tell us who we are. That happens a lot, by the way. Maybe we've allowed other people to define us. They've put us in a box. Maybe you grew up and people told you certain things about yourself, and today that's who you think you are. And this theory says, you know what? Don't let other people define who you are. You define who you are. It is your life. So who are you? You and I need to ask ourselves the question, who am I? And then secondly, why am I here? What is my purpose in life? There's an old saying that says, show me a person who has no purpose and I'll show you a miserable person. Show me a person who has no purpose in life and I will show you a miserable person. The idea of direction, the idea of purpose. We all want to feel like we're going somewhere. Have you ever felt stuck in your life? I have. Have you ever felt stuck? I have never had anyone ever say to me, yeah, it feels awesome to be stuck. Nope. Feeling stuck doesn't feel good. It's almost always a unhappy, unpleasant, painful, negative experience. Why? Well, because This theory would say all of us naturally want to feel like our lives mean something, that we're going somewhere, that we have purpose, that we have direction. And we need to determine that. It's possible, if we're not careful, other people determine our direction. That's one of the traps we fall into. We let other people press us and push us in certain directions, and we don't decide for ourselves. It's our lives. And so if we're not careful, we let other people say, well, you're going to do this, or you're going to do this, or you're going to do this. Now, sometimes we allow other people to influence us. There's nothing wrong with that because we need relationships, right? But at the end of the day, you and I are responsible for the direction of our lives. So we need to decide for ourselves, where are we going? What is my purpose? Who am I? What defines me? What direction am I going? Why am I here? Who am I? Why am I here? Those two key existential questions are connected to this idea of purpose and meaning. And then the last idea may be an interesting one, and it is this. Usually in our world today, the word anxiety creates a negative reaction. People don't want to feel anxious or nervous. People don't, I mean, anxiety kind of is usually seen as like a negative kind of a thing. If you've never heard of the concept existential anxiety, I give you a little bit about that in the lecture notes this week, and the author of our textbook also talks about it. Again, Viktor Frankl had an interesting idea. Frankl believed that anxiety is actually a little bit of a warning sign in our lives that something's about to happen or that we're worried about something, and that can be a good thing. And that anxiety is not a bad thing, it's just a matter of what we do with it. So what's called existential anxiety means this. Let's ask you this. If I told you today that you had a big major exam next week and that your grade in this course relied on how you did on that exam, my hunch is most of you would want to do well. And there would be that anxiety, a little bit of that tension of wanting to do well. Wanting to do well is a good thing. I would hope you would not say, I don't care, right? Some of you worry and have some anxiety over your kids. Well, that's because you love your kids and you want them to do well. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just a thing. It's a part of, some of you may have anxiety about the future. Well, where am I going? And how are things going to work out? Franklin would say, good. Not that anxiety is good, but good for you that you're thinking about the future. We ought to think about the future. We shouldn't worry about the future, but maybe our anxiety ought to get us, maybe if we can learn how to harness it. It can become our friend, so to speak. Now, again, that's unusual because, again, we live in a world today where people are super, super anxious for all kinds of reasons. And usually people don't want to feel anxious. Existentialism comes along and says, no, anxiety is a condition of living. If you're a human being, it's like pain, right? You've maybe heard that idea. Pain is just a part of life, and none of us wants it, but we have to learn to deal with it. Well, anxiety is the same way. Anxiety is a condition of living. And what's called existential anxiety is this idea that sometimes our anxiety, if we'll learn to harness it, what it'll do is it'll drive us in a good way. So I'm anxious about doing well. Well, you and I should want to do well. Now, you and I should not let our anxiety run out of control and sort of and to where it has control of us instead of us having control over it. But this idea of existential anxiety is an interesting idea that I give you some information about when it comes at the end of your lecture notes that I want you just to kind of think a little bit about as we kind of go forward. So those are just some basic core concepts. As you can tell from just this little mini lecture, this is a little bit more of a philosophical type of approach, right? A little bit of a deep thinking kind of an approach, right? Come back next week for module number 4. And we're going to talk a little bit more about how we take these core ideas, like our search for purpose and meaning and the need for relationships. We're going to talk a little bit more in next module of how we take these ideas and we actually put them into practice. I've mentioned a couple of examples just now in this little mini lecture. But come back next week. Study your lecture notes. Do your discussion question. Do your homework. Come back next week. And we'll talk one more week about existential theory. See you next time.